Wonderful. Well, good to see everybody. Welcome to this wonderful webinar. And we just so appreciate Erick Stakelbeck being with us. All of you are very familiar with him. And we have a wide range of people joining this call tonight. But I want to just say my hats are off to you, Erick, the incredible role that you're playing. You just moved from Philadelphia to Dallas in the middle of this war. You are one of the major leaders of TBN, leading the Watchman, really keeping the American public informed from a Christian perspective on what's going on in this war front. And we do not know how to thank you enough. We've got a lot of dedicated people on here tonight, Jews, Christians, Democrats, Republicans, and we want you to talk to us a little bit about where we are. I know that your history has been and what you've covered really for the duration of your time with TBN and the Watchman is just that strategic predicament that Israel continues to be in with Hezbollah and Hamas. You have been on the front line and you understand this far better than most people. And as you've been covering the war, and most people on this call have been watching, of course, now going into week 6, if you can believe it. We are hearing and understand that Hamas that has lost control of northern Gaza. This is a big deal, and that the IDF has made the significant progress. Can you give us the latest update on what's going on? We understand this. Let me say this. That the IDF is surrounded Gaza City, and even more importantly now surrounded what seems to be the central command, the Shifa Hospital. Tell us a little bit about what you understand.
Yeah, Heather, first of all, everyone, thanks so much for having me. It's a blessing and honor to be here. And I have to say real quick, I did move during the war, but the hardest part may have been as a Philadelphia Eagles fan coming to Dallas, the Cowboys country. That was the hardest part about the move. But in all seriousness, everyone, great to be with you. And I wish it was under better circumstances, of course, as the war is raging. I moved here to actually launch a nightly show in January on TBN. We're going to have a lot to talk about. God's timing, I think, with this move to Dallas. But the IDF right now, I believe, is making incredible progress in Gaza, and perhaps at an even faster clip than the IDF even expected themselves. And look, the IDF is a great fighting force, of course, but making major gains to the point right now. Number one, as Heather mentioned, Gaza City is not only encircled, the IDF is in Gaza City. Al-Shifa Hospital, which we'll talk about in a minute, the major command and control center for Hamas. The IDF is there at the doorstep, literally right now. But literally thousands of Hamas terrorists have been killed, including 150 on Friday in a major firefight in the Gaza City area. Today, Israel just captured 20 Hamas terrorists and will certainly glean a lot of valuable information in interrogations with them. So right now, reports on the ground are that Hamas terrorists are disconnected from the leadership. Number one, remember Yahya Sinwar, who may be the most wanted man right now. He's the leader of Hamas in Gaza. He's isolated, most likely under Al-Shifa Hospital or another hospital in Gaza City. He's isolated and alone in the bunker. And Hamas terrorists, I believe, are stunned and taken aback, quite frankly, by the onslaught of the IDF. The fierce fighting that is going on right now is really being driven by the IDF, which is on the pursuit constantly and relentless. And Hamas is on its heels right now. And, you know, it seems that every time before Israel or the United States goes into a war, goes into a major engagement, you have the doomsayers, the doom and gloom, many times in the mainstream media and certain analysts who say it's going to be a quagmire. There's going to be massive casualties. It's going to take years. There can be no clear-cut victory here. We've heard this many times over the years. Well, the IDF seems to be defying all expectations right now and really making major gains. That said, number one, this could stretch on for months. And once Hamas is pacified, and not only pacified, I should say Gaza is pacified, and Hamas is crushed decisively, because there's really no other option here other than the end of Hamas, no doubt. But once that happens, will there be pockets of resistance? What comes next, the day after? We're not quite sure, but it's very interesting right now that the IDF has essentially cut Gaza in half into the northern half and the southern half. Of course, the IDF which to my mind, and I'll say it very plainly, is the most humane fighting force in human history, along with the United States military. The IDF, and it had no duty to do so, has obviously for the past 4 weeks at least implored civilians to move south. Hamas has been trying to stop that, actually shooting reportedly some civilians, setting off explosives along the escape trail, the evacuation trail. Just, there's no other word to use it, folks, just demonic by Hamas. But thankfully, as Hamas is losing control of the situation in northern Gaza, around Gaza City, they're not able to stop now civilians from leaving. So we've seen tens of thousands of civilians over the past several days go south. And what that means is Hamas is increasingly isolated there in the northern half as it's split in two. I am hearing reports that in terms of the hostages, and there's some 239 still in Hamas's clutches and Islamic Jihad's clutches there in Gaza, that some may be in Khan Yunis, which is in the southern half of Gaza. But again, they're in these subterranean tunnels. Look, at least 300 miles worth of these tunnels stretching underneath Gaza City, literally a city beneath a city. And that's where Hamas's top leadership is, of course. Last point here, Al-Shifa Hospital, which Heather mentioned at the top, this is home and has been for years to Hamas's command and control center. And we see the world already wailing and gnashing its teeth and calling for a premature ceasefire. What is Israel going to do about Al-Shifa Hospital? Because look, if Hamas's command and control center is underneath this hospital, including top leaders, some of the top leaders, the other are living in luxury in Qatar and other places overseas, can Israel shorten the war perhaps? If it takes out Hamas's command and control center underneath Al-Shifa Hospital, seizes it, does that shorten the war? That's a big question. Obviously, there are civilians there that Hamas is intentionally using as human shields. So the world is watching that very intensely and ready to pounce on Israel. We can get to Hezbollah as well, because I think the larger story here is the northern front. But that's a little bit of an overview, Heather, to start.
That's amazing. Well, Erick, you have done extensive coverage. So I'm going to drill down with you, if you don't mind. You have done extensive coverage on the tunnel systems in Gaza, and you've been actually in a Hezbollah tunnel and in the north. So can you elaborate just a little bit about, it seems like it's like layers of hell.
Yeah.
The first,
So
like
true.
Dante's hell, where it
Yes.
goes down, and then you've got hell above in Gaza, just because of the way that they've structured the city and how they've oppressed the people. Tell us about how in the world are they going to get under Al-Shifa Hospital to the command and control center? How are they going to do it? And how are they going to get these hostages?
Well, number one, to the second part of your question, Heather, that's a good question. Look, the hostages, today, Jake Sullivan, the U.S. National Security Advisor, said he's not sure if the U.S. citizens, remember, there are Americans being held right now as hostages, if they're still alive. He was frank about it. He's not sure. We assume that most hostages are alive because they're very valuable to Hamas, I'm sad to say, as bargaining chips. I hate to even use that term. This past week, I interviewed 7 hostage families. I got to tell you, these were the most difficult interviews, I've been doing this for a while, that I've ever done. What do you even say? What do you even ask? But the resilience of these Israeli families who's, look, one man I interviewed, his wife and his 3 children, all underneath the age of 10, are being held in Gaza right now. As a father, and we have parents, grandparents on this call, it's unfathomable. So I got through it somehow. It was the most difficult thing I've ever done. But the hostages, we pray, are alive. I've been praying for a miraculous hostage rescue. I think of Genesis 14, where Abraham and 318 men go and save Abraham's nephew Lot from the Canaanite kings. I think of 1 Samuel, David and his men go, and the Amalekites had raided their tents when they were gone. They go and save their wives, their children. So there is a biblical precedent here in the land of Israel. I'm praying for that kind of miracle. God's arm is not too short. I truly believe that in this situation. Nonetheless, it's a tough go. Clearly, the IDF, obviously masterful military tacticians and strategists. I don't quite know how they're going to do it. What they have been doing thus far, they've been trying to avoid getting in the tunnels where it's dark and it's uncharted territory. Hamas knows these tunnels like the back of its hand, but for the IDF, look, they're going in kind of blind in a sense, although they have them mapped out. But once you're in those tunnels, it's a different story. Obviously, Hamas lives and breathes underground in those tunnels. What the IDF has been doing is two things. Number one, targeting the entrance and exit points above ground. Many times these Hamas terrorists will pop out of a hole, quite literally, pop out of the exit point of these tunnels with an RPG and fire at Israeli soldiers. So Israel's been targeting those and also collapsing the tunnels from above, from on top, bombing them. And then the tunnels are collapsing in on these Hamas terrorists. That's been the strategy. But with the hostages, and I assume Israel has some excellent intelligence in terms of where they are. We shall see. We're praying for a miracle there. I don't know quite how Israel is going to maneuver that. And the big question as well is, are they scattered? I mentioned Khan Yunis earlier. That's in the south. Has Hamas scattered them throughout the Strip? And Islamic Jihad, another Iranian proxy in Gaza, they reportedly have some of the hostages as well. So continue to pray on this, folks, for sure. It's sorely needed. Real quick, Heather, on the tunnel structure. I was in a Hezbollah tunnel with the IDF last year, and Heather, you described it accurately. I described it like descending into the bowels of hell. This Hezbollah tunnel, and it's the same deal in Gaza with the Hamas tunnels, descended, folks, if you can picture this, some 200 feet underground.
It's just unreal.
It's unreal, Heather. And I went down and down, and it got darker and darker and deeper. And yet, it's not some hole that your little kid dug in the backyard. These were highly advanced. These tunnels, number one, concrete. Number two, electrical work. We found heavy machinery in there. They were well lit. It was unbelievable, the extent of advancement for these tunnels. And that was Hezbollah. There were some 7 of those along the Israel-Lebanon border. Israel uncovered them, thankfully, about 5 years ago now, but they kept the one open for the world to see what they're up against. Not that the world seems to care, sad to say, but I was able to get a look inside of these tunnels, and it gave me a mental picture now. Okay, I wasn't in a Gaza tunnel, but I was in a Hezbollah tunnel, different soil and all the rest, but same idea for sure.
It's remarkable. Well, Eric, I'm going to read a verse, Isaiah 49:24 and 25. And we have been praying this verse for the hostages every day. Can plunder be taken from warriors, or captives be rescued from the fierce? But this is what the Lord says. Yes, captives will be taken from the warriors, and the plunder will be retrieved from the fierce. For I will contend with those who contend with you, and your children I will save. And it just seems like an appropriate season of time for us to be on the wall, crying out for these hostages, crying out in the midst of this, that somehow, not just that somehow we'll have to have a pause in the war so the hostages can be released and we do some crazy deal with Hamas, but just that the IDF will be able to get the hostages without a deal from Hamas. And I know that seems like an impossibility, but the tunnels are an impossibility. There's a dropping off point everywhere you turn. So we're going to have some miracles. We're going to have some breakthroughs. And I think that's what the cry is out of this phone call, is that we will stand and believe all the way to the end for the release of these hostages and for the decisive success for Israel. Well, I have another question, and that is that we have continued to experience, and I'm the proponent for our government. I cannot afford, and none of us on this call can afford to have President Biden fail. We can't. We can be critical at another juncture, another time. We don't have to like the politics, but we cannot afford for him to fail. Tony Blinken, Secretary of Defense Austin, and we need to be standing in prayer for them and asking for even more grace, because so much world pressure is on them from the UN, the EU, the Arab nations. Everywhere they turn, their own party is turning inward to fight against them. And so it is just it's a time like no other, but it seems that God is testing the nations as to where they're going to stand as it concerns Israel. We knew this would happen. We knew this would happen in these later days, that we would begin to see this. And I believe that that's where we are. I want us to see the United States succeed, but there's that tendency to call for a ceasefire and to try to get Israel to stop the war. And even to stop it for 3 days is suicide for Israel after all the work that's been done. I want you to talk about that for just a few minutes with us.
Great point, Heather, all around. And thank you for that verse from Isaiah. That's very, very encouraging. Here's a question, and Israelis have been posing this as well. Would the United States have agreed to a ceasefire in the aftermath of 9/11 or in the aftermath of Pearl Harbor? I think not. And that's exactly the situation Israel is in right now. We have the world, or many quarters of the world, once again calling for Israel to agree to a ceasefire prematurely and leave Hamas to fight another day. As I laid out at the beginning of this call, Israel is making great strides in its goal of crushing Hamas decisively once and for all. This death cult, that's exactly what Hamas are. These are modern day Nazis, only wearing different uniforms. And if you had any doubt, the IDF revealed today that it found Arabic translations of Mein Kampf in a home of a Hamas member in Gaza. This is what they're studying. This is the ideology they live and breathe. So that's number one. Number two, everyone on the call, envision this. Okay, Israel agrees to a ceasefire and Hamas is left to fight another day. Does anyone on this call believe that Hamas will lay down its arms, have a change of heart, and not plot to launch multiple October 7ths in the very near future? If you doubt that, a top Hamas official said last week on Arab television that that's exactly what he wants to do, that what Hamas wants to do, many more October 7ths, many more attacks like we saw a month ago, the worst massacre of the Jewish people since the Holocaust. That's number one. Number two, what kind of message would that send to the world, in particular, the world's worst actors, in particular, Hamas's benefactor, the Iranian regime, and Hezbollah? If Israel leaves Hamas to fight another day and shows weakness, quite frankly, in that regard, Iran and Hezbollah will be salivating. Number one, not only to attack Israel and go all in there, but number two, I think the U.S. has a stake in this, no doubt, in that if Israel does agree to a premature ceasefire, I don't believe it will, but if it did, the world is going to say they did it because America pressured them to do it. So it's going to make the United States look weak as well, certainly in the eyes of Russia and China and others too, not only the Iranian regime. So many, many problems here on many levels. Israel, look, right now, Prime Minister Netanyahu, his war cabinet, Heather, you and I and others on this call know them. They need to have spines of steel like no other time. We're keeping everyone in prayer. All the leaders, keep them in your prayer for sure, prayers for sure. Because the world right now, we all saw the comments by Emmanuel Macron, the French president, on Friday, which I thought were a disgrace. Now he walked them back, but damage done, saying that Israel's killing the elderly and children and insinuating that Israel's intentionally targeting civilians. Madness. But you're seeing that now creeping in, right? The grace period Israel had after October 7th, sadly, has gone away, and the world has reverted to its default anti-Israel position. And even worse than that, I believe there's a great darkness descending upon the world right now. And I don't exaggerate when I say that. We saw 300,000 people. I'm talking about the Western world in particular. We saw 300,000 people marching in London yesterday in support of Hamas. Not just, well, help the civilians in Gaza. No, these were from the river to the sea type rallies against Israel. It's London, it's New York City, where we had people trying to kick the doors in at Grand Central Station on Thursday night. Veterans Day weekend, in fact, by the way, that this all went down. So we're seeing this around the world. Here's the good news. We have people like we have on this call right now. We've got a major pro-Israel rally on Tuesday in D.C. We had today at least 150,000 people marching in Paris against anti-Semitism. We need to shine light in this growing darkness. As Heather said earlier, we're in the days. I believe these are Bible times, and the darkness is growing, but we can be a light in the darkness, and I believe we have a duty to do so.
We do. Well, Eric, thank you. This is so important. And, it just seems that while evil is being exposed to the utmost degree, that we might as well continue to pray that it continue to be exposed. Because as we
Yeah.
see war fatigue set in and we see, support kind of wane for this war, because all of us can look on it in horror. We can also go, we can hardly believe this. Even 6 weeks later, our hearts are burdened. But where will we be in 6 more weeks? Where will Europe be in 6 weeks? Where's the United States going to be? And it just seems to me that we need to continue to pray that evil will continue to be exposed. Because in my frame of reference, it seems to me that Hamas has overplayed their hand. To be that evil is to at least have most of the world agree that is horrible. That's not okay. And it's okay for Israel to defend themselves. At least we got buy-in to that degree. Maybe we need to continue to pray that their evil continues to be exposed. And
Great point, Heather. Yeah.
Really,
And you mentioned Isaiah earlier. I think of when Isaiah said, "Woe to those who call good evil and evil good." That's exactly what the world is doing right now. People are essentially hailing Hamas, including right here in the West, in large numbers, especially among young people.
Yes. Well, it seems to me that as we watch this happen, that going back to our leaders and how important it is that they're standing with Israel all the way to the end, formidably, and President Biden, Tony Blinken, all of our major leaders, our congressmen, our Senate, that there is a loud, perpetuating voice going on, because that turning back to say, oh, Israel, you need to, be careful about the civilian population, and you need to, don't bomb the hospital, and all of those things, like we're sort of like teachers to Israel about their war. It undermines and it puts Israel at the same plane as Hamas, like we're having to supervise them. And to me, I don't know about you, Eric, but this is what is fueling anti-Semitism. If we're having to watch Israel like we're having to watch Hamas because they're untrustworthy, what does that say to all the Jews there around the world? We've got to watch the Jews.
Exactly. Yeah, Heather, I think 2 points here. Number one, it infuriates me when Israel is lectured to. Israel is a sovereign nation. Mm-hmm. Israel and the IDF can make their own decisions, thank you very much, at the end of the day. And number two, when Western leaders intone and lecture Israel about avoiding civilian casualties, Heather, they know very well that Israel goes to extraordinary lengths, even to the point of sometimes IDF soldiers are jeopardized to save civilian lives. And Western leaders know that. But Heather, what they're doing is, I don't know if this is the right term, paying lip service, or basically they're restless, far left, radical left bases, which are very vocal right now. It's almost like they're doing this to appease them, in a sense, saying, hey, Israel, you better be careful. They know that Israel goes to extraordinary lengths to avoid civilian casualties. It doesn't even need to be said. And that's a great point you made, Heather, that does, in my view, ramp up anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic feeling, because people are hearing this who may not know the issues like the people on this call right now do. And they say, hey, wait a minute, Israel's targeting civilians? That's horrible. So it sets a bad precedent, no doubt, and it's unnecessary. Number two, I don't think we can leave the call tonight without mentioning the situation to the north with Hezbollah. Real quick, we talk about Israel taking great lengths to avoid civilian casualties. Today, the IDF dropped leaflets in southern Lebanon. Things are coming to a head with Hezbollah. Just so everyone on the call knows, this may be the biggest takeaway of our conversation tonight. They dropped leaflets on southern Lebanon, which is Hezbollah country. That's where Hezbollah lives and breathes, encouraging civilians there to move north, move essentially out of Hezbollah country. I have to tell you, I don't know how long the IDF can wait to act to the north. Today, Hezbollah launched another attack, fired anti-tank missiles. 21 Israeli civilians were wounded, including one seriously in critical condition, reportedly. Look, under normal times, not that times are ever normal really in the Middle East, but if the Gaza war obviously wasn't raging right now, and Hezbollah was doing what it's been doing since October 7th, literally every single day, firing rockets and missiles and launching drones against northern Israel. At least 7 Israeli soldiers have been killed in these engagements. By the way, at least 71 Hezbollah fighters have been killed as well. But in normal times, Israel would have already gone in and unleashed on Hezbollah. We would have had a full-scale war to the north. The only reason Israel has pulled its punches to a degree so far there is obviously Gaza. Israel would prefer not to be fighting on two fronts right now. But folks, I have to tell you, I think it's unavoidable in the long term and perhaps the short term. I think, picture this. If Israel, when Israel finishes the job in Gaza, crushes Hamas, pacifies Gaza, yet you have Hezbollah, which is magnitudes more powerful and more well-equipped than Hamas, still at full strength, essentially, in southern Lebanon, perched on your northern border, it's unsustainable. After October 7th, everything changed. It was a threshold that was crossed. Think about all the citizens of northern Israel who have evacuated some 32 communities, beautiful communities like Kiryat Shimon and Metula, all along that border. What would you go back? I'm asking everyone an honest question. Would you return after seeing what you saw in the south on October 7th? Would you return to the Lebanon border communities knowing that Hezbollah is right there, even more powerful than Hamas, with the same intentions as Hamas in terms of carrying out many October 7ths, I'm sad to say. That's why I think it's unsustainable. Israel, I believe, is going to have to act against Hezbollah. And when the dust settles here, we may see not only Hamas, but also Hezbollah decisively crushed. I don't know if that's going to happen tomorrow with Hezbollah, but it's getting to the point where, look, Israel right now has 360,000 reserve soldiers called up. The entire country is united and on war footing. This seems like an opportunity to eliminate, which is the much more serious threat, the Hezbollah threat as well.
And while the United States is in the Mediterranean Sea with all of our might and force there, it seems like it's the time that you would want to go ahead and do something like that. I thought it was interesting, Eric, today that the United States has been today bombing in Syria. Now, we've been a little reluctant to respond to Iran and Hezbollah. We've done a few little attacks, and you kind of wish we could see more might there. Today seemed to be a little bit of a turning point for the United States, where they're stepping in a little bit more with that. And our dear friend, you actually have met him before, Eran Glazer, who runs the National Leadership Center for the IDF in the city of Ariel. His son was in that drone attack coming out of Lebanon 2 days ago. There were 4 injured soldiers, 3 critically wounded, and he was lightly injured. He's in the hospital today, suffering from shrapnel wounds, but he is a man of God. And he wrote me tonight and just said, we are strong. We are more fierce than Hezbollah. We are determined. We will fight to the end, and we will destroy this horrible enemy. And I just believe that's the resolve in the midst of suffering and difficulty. This is the resolve of the nation of Israel. Well, Eric, one last thing, and this is a little bit impromptu. I've got Congressman Randy Weber on the phone tonight, and you and I, of course, are working closely with members of Congress, with the leaders in the United States. And fortunately, now that we have a new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnston, who's a good friend of ours, we have been able to see a whole section, a whole group of legislation actually get passed through the House. And most people on this call are not witting of that. But one of the biggest things that passed was a week ago, last Friday, called the SHIP Act. And it's the first time that we have seen a reimposing of sanctions on Iran back to the 2020 level of sanctions on those shipping companies, on individuals, on nations that are importing oil from Iran. And the exciting thing to me is to see a pivot where you've got 2/3 of Democrats that just passed that bill. Yeah. All of the Republicans and 2/3 of the Democrats passed that bill in the House. Now it's headed to the Senate. It seems to me to be a shift in our policy with Iran. I believe we're going to see some of this, some changes in our U.S. government. We cannot go back to what we had. Where are we headed?
Yeah, Heather, so glad you brought this up. We can't talk about Hamas and Hezbollah without talking about the head of the snake, the Iranian regime. October 7th does not happen without Iran. without the active support, funding, training of the Iranian regime, we had at least 500 Hamas and Islamic Jihad operatives training in Iran in the run-up to October 7th. They were there in September. I'm sure it was all just a coincidence or not. Congressman, great to see you, by the way. Thanks for your great work. And Heather, you and your team on the Hill doing incredible work, holding the Iranian regime accountable, because, folks, at the end of the day, Iran has to have its feet held to the fire, the Iranian regime, and it hasn't been done over the past few years. The spotlight needs to be on the Iranian regime right now. They are the fount of all this terror. Our friend Naftali Bennett, Heather, has said that the Iranian regime is like an octopus with its tentacles reaching throughout the region, whether it's Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Gaza. The common denominator in all those countries is, number one, they've been basically descended into hell themselves thanks to the Iranian regime. And number two, they're home to Iranian proxies. You can't solve this problem in the region ultimately without holding the Iranian regime accountable. Massive sanctions that really, truly bite, number one. And number two, Iran essentially right now has a gun to the world's head. What I mean by that is Iran has been saying over the past 6 weeks, if you continue Israel in Gaza, and if, America, you continue to support Israel, there's no telling what we may do. We may just unleash Hezbollah on Israel and the world. So this can't continue, this blackmail, extortion type posture by the Iranian regime, which at the end of the day, the fingerprints for this attack lead back to Tehran. So Heather, bravo to you and the team, and keep it up on the Hill, and Congressman, everything you're doing, because again, at the end of the day, Israel can crush Hamas and Hezbollah, and I believe ultimately they will, but the Iranian regime is still living and breathing, then that Iranian ideology lives to fight another day.
Yes. Well, I want to thank you, Eric, for being with us tonight. You are incredible, and you're doing such a great job. The Watchman, everybody needs to pay attention to the Watchman, and the show, the TBN show that Erick Stakelbeck is leading. And we sure appreciate the incredible work. You know, I've always defined a watchman as one who observes and one who preserves, one who makes it their business to watch and understand what's going on, and then those who turn to preserve the state of Israel. And really, for that matter, the United States. We are in this together. Eric, thank you for joining us and being with us. We sure appreciate that. I want to thank all of you for—
Thanks, Heather. God bless.
Yes, thank you. And I want to thank all of you on the call tonight, and particularly Congressman Weber for being with us. And Congressman, would you like to say a few words? I'm so proud of our Congress and what you all are doing. Just appreciate you joining us tonight. Anything you'd like to add?
Well, Heather, thank y'all. Can y'all hear me all right?
Yes.
Good. Pardon me. I'm down on the beach in Galveston, Texas. We've had a couple of days to kind of take off down here, so I wasn't sure how good our connection was. But thank y'all for doing this. We are so excited about Mike Johnston being Speaker of the House. You're absolutely right. Congress is making a turn toward the better, and you're right about the Iranian. The head of the snake is the IRGC, is Iran. And I loved it when President Trump was in office, because they knew that, you know, he wasn't fooling around. And we do pray for our president, by the way, all the time, that we don't want him to fail, because to whom much is given, much is required. And you know what's at stake. I know we all know what's at stake. So we're excited about the turns and the moves that we're making. We're thinking that Congress is going to get on track. We're going to get support for Israel. There's been a battle, as you well know, about money for Ukraine, money for the border, and money for Israel. And I don't want those three convoluted and tied up. I want that Israel funding to go through, period. And then we'll tackle the other two, especially our border and then Ukraine. But good things are happening. We're excited about it. We are optimistic, so stay tuned.
Well, we are staying tuned with you, and so excited about— I think we've had like 6 pieces of legislation already go through since Speaker Johnston has gotten into office, all related to this war, all related to
absolutely.
where we are. It is really phenomenal just to see boots on the ground, to see Congress on war footing with the nation of Israel. We could not be prouder to be Americans. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us. And it's a Sunday night and everybody's got things to do. But thank you for your incredible support for JH Israel, for U.S. Israel Education Association. We continue our work on the Hill as we continue training in the center of Israel in the National Leadership Center in the city of Ariel. And we sure appreciate all of you joining us tonight.